All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jean-François Savard. I'll be chairing this panel on information and disinformation about the Arctic region on social media. With me, I have four excellent colleagues. Aline Espiritu, um, Gregory Polza, Alexandre Millet, and Julie Renault. So what we'll do is we'll start with Alexandre, then Julie, then Gregory, and Eileen. They'll each present for 10 minutes, about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session after the presentation. All right. So Alexandre, if you
I
sorry.
would like to see Alexandre's presentation,
What?
so I'm gonna go.
Okay, no problem.
Alright.
So, all right, Alexandre.
I'll try to speak loud enough. I think my voice is strong enough for it. All this crazy idea about looking at Twitter to see what people are saying about the Arctic and what the misconceptions are came from Jean-François, and Mathieu couldn't be here today. So basically, they told me like, all right, we have a crazy idea. We wanna know what people are talking about what are talking about on Twitter about the Arctic. How do you think, like, is the project doable? Like, can we scrape Twitter? Can we try to find what people are saying about the Arctic? And can we try to make sense of it? Like, Jean-François was very concerned about like the hardware features. I had other concern like about how to make this project work, and basically like the only way for us to know like if their idea was worth it was to test it out. So that's basically what we did. So first of all, you pretty much understand right now that I'm talking about methodology in this one, and they're gonna talk about what they use the app for. So I'm the fun part of the presentation. Like, you all love methodology, I'm sure of it. So basically, we had a choice to do right at the start. We had a choice between like programming languages to get the tweets and to create graphics and the tables. So we had a choice between the R language and Python. Basically, it came to the choice of R for multiple reasons. First, we have a preference for it. Me and Jean-François are already like using R usually in our lives and our work. We have like somewhat of a deep knowledge of R. We also think that R provides better result for high-end user than Python because of the work we were trying to do with this particular project. So we had some goals with the project, and we thought that R could provide better result in the end. R is also full of packages, like mini libraries that you can use to create more stuff. I'm not a smart person, but when I was young, I liked to play with Legos. And basically, R is a bunch of Legos brick that you can take and assemble together and make something wonderful. And hopefully, we created something that is kind of wonderful. So we're also using R because of the data visualization. Like I said, it provides very good high-end graphics. It provides good tables too, and it also provides us with something called Shiny, which is a package for R, and that we're gonna use Shiny to put our application on the internet, and we're gonna make you interact with it. Like, that's the ultimate goal that we want to do. We want to create something that you guys are going to be able to interact with. So, first of all, we had two major problems. First problem was dealing with the hardware limitation. We had two problems here. The first problem we encountered was the RAM, like the random access memory. That's the thing that you use to stock the data if you want. Like, I'm going to put something, I'm going to make the computer remind about it, and that's going to be there. If there's not enough of it, it's going to slow down, or it's going to straight up like exit the application. The other one was the parallel processing or the CPU usage. Basically, if you want to think about parallel processing, because I don't want to go too much into details because Jean-François will slap me. Parallel processing is basically like, instead of having one person do all the task. I'm going to split the task in smaller tasks, and I'm going to reassemble it at the end. So like one person, instead of having one person do the task, I could split the task in four. Out of four people do the task, then reassemble it at the end to get one object. So that's basically what R allowed us to do with a package called Quanteda, and there's other package too to do it, but there's already an option in Quanteda to do it. The other problem that we had was how to turn trash into treasure. I don't know if you ever downloaded like a bunch of tweets. I don't know. The first time I downloaded tweets, I had like 4 million of them, and I was like, whew, this is a pile of hot beep. So I was like, we need to find a way to remove the unnecessary thing. We need to find a way to eliminate the things. And to give you an idea like of what we found while trying to prune the data, we found like stuff about cryptocurrencies giveaway. We found like and we're looking for Arctic stuff, and because they use like keywords that we were searching for, it was popping up on what we were in our database because we were searching for those words. So basically, crypto. We found stuff about a book about wizards and dragons in the Arctic. It was wonderful. So it's basically trial and error. And once you see something pop up or a big like spike into frequencies of the words that you don't really think should belong there, you investigate and you subset the thing to look what it is all about, and then you can choose to delete it or not. So, and the other problem that we had was the data with the data filtering was how to present the data to. So basically, we thought about how to present those data. We had frequencies, word cloud with words or hashtags. We have a sentiment analysis. We have coherence network analysis with words, with hashtags, with usernames, so we know who's talking with who. And we have also PCA analysis that we kind of build up some teams and look for those words inside the tweets to see what people are talking about when they're talking about the Arctic. The other thing that was really important for Jean-François and Mathieu was to make it interactive. And that was one of the biggest problems that we had to solve, because every time you want to interact with the data, like, let's say like you want to remove the environment keywords, then you have to process it all over again. So you're back to the problem with the CPU. Like you're gonna do the same task again and again and again and again and again, which is gonna take a lot of computing power and is a little bit redundant. So we had to find like solutions about it. What we did to solve the solution about the high CPU usage is that we pre-process the data. So basically what we do is we take the full data, we process it once, and then we attribute an ID tag on that particular tweet. And once it's processed, we basically match numbers instead of reprocessing all the thing all over again. So basically what it does is it goes through the list of data that we have, and then after that it selects the numbers and match the numbers with the pre-processed data, so we skip the processing once again. So the problem with that is that we need a lot of RAM, because if we pre-process the data, we got to preload the data. So basically, instead of loading one data set, you have to preload like 4 or 5 data sets. So it takes a lot of RAM to remember it. And the other thing is that, like I said, we're just going to subset the data frames with text ID. So instead of processing all over again, we're just going to match the numbers, the ID numbers with the other ID. So that's the way we found to solve the problem and make it more friendly and more speedy, because people want fast results. So basically, in the end, it's an unexpected journey there and back again. Like every time we're going to try something else, we're going to experiment. It's going to be an iterative process. It's an iterative approach. Like every time we add something to the data set, we have to look for new inconsistencies. We have to look for new words that are not supposed to be there. We have to look for a multiple of other factors. We are trying also to refactor as much as possible. Refactoring means that we try to shrink the code as much as we can, because we don't want to have like spaghetti code. And once you have spaghetti code, like it's hard to untangle, because then you can, like if I send something to Jean-François, he's gonna look at it. It's gonna be, I have no idea what all of this means. So the way to do it is to try to filter it and make it as friendly as possible. The other challenge that we have with this is also that we're working with 8 versions. So basically there's a public and private version. In the private version that we use, there's an extended data set. So basically we have 3 years of tweet that we collected. And we also have more options that we can do. We can see the old tweets, something that you cannot do as a public user, and we can also download the tweets in a Word document. So that's an example of what we're doing. We're also looking always to have a modular approach. Like everything needs to be in separate boxes. It's easier to work that way because we have 8 versions. And also what we're doing is we're trying to add like a number of new functions, new features as we go along, and to try to make it better. So probably the next thing Jean-François was talking to me about was to try to do supervised machine learning. So we're going to try to do that in the future, but I'm going to leave, I think, Julie to speak to you about her work.
Thank you, Alexandre. Julie?
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here to present at the Arctic Circle Assembly. I'm going to be talking about trends and dynamics regarding the Arctic conversation on Twitter. So I thought it'd be interesting to get a little perspective on how the Arctic is being talked about on Twitter and what stood out about the Arctic for Twitter users. So I'd like to start by thanking le Ministère des Relations internationales et de la Francophonie du Québec and the Department of Defense of Canada through their MINDS program for their support in this project. So my goal today with you is to present our observations on how the Arctic is discussed by users on social networks, singularly on Twitter. For this presentation, we are going to look at 3 elements, namely the frequency of tweets about the Arctic, the topics discussed, and the correlation between the different themes in tweets when users talk about the Arctic. The data that was used for this presentation came from the database that Alexandre was talking about. We used the English version of the app, so the English tweets were used, and it's for the keyword Arctic from January 1st of 2020 until the end of August 2022. So let's start with the frequency of tweets mentioning the keyword Arctic. Here we'll look at how often the Arctic is being discussed on Twitter, when was the Arctic a more salient topic of conversation, and finally, what drew the attention of the Arctic for Twitter users. In the graph on the screen, you can see the number of mention of the term Arctic for this period. So as you can see, at certain times, the Arctic is much more discussed on Twitter. To give you an idea of what's causing these jumps in mentions of the term Arctic and of what got users' attention, I went on the application to look at co-occurrences of words of those specific times, which allows us to see at those times what users were talking about when they were mentioning the Arctic. So what we can see is that throughout the whole data period, Arctic was discussed a lot in climate and in energy terms. In 2020, there were peaks of conversation for the months of June, July, August, and November. In all 4 cases, what we saw is that climate issues got a lot of attention. On the screen, I'm only showing you 2 of them, but similar dynamics can be seen throughout the whole period. On the left side of the slide, you can see the month of June. During this month, there were heat waves across the Arctic, and this largely dominated the attention. Users also talked about energy as evidenced by terms oil, spill, or drilling further down the graph. In November, if we look at the graph, it is also both energy and climate alongside with wildlife protection that dominated the discussion. In 2021, the same dynamics are again evident. There were significant jumps in the number of mentions of the term Arctic for the months of February, May, June, and October. I'm not going to go through all the graphs with you, but you can see the same type of words were used in the discussion. In October, there is something new on the graph. I don't know if you can see it well on the screen, but where there's a black arrow, terms like military or nuclear were used by social media users. So for this month, the tweets and questions were related to military exercises conducted by Russia in the Arctic. So for 2022, we had a significant jumps for the months of February, June, and August. Although climate-related words remain predominant, we see that there is a significant increase in terms with security or military connotation. Looking at the graph on this period, we can see that the implications of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the Arctic has attracted attention, given that Russia is a major player in the region. On the graphs, you can see where there are black arrows, the use of terms such as security, Ukraine, NATO, war, or military. This trend decreases a little bit throughout the period of 2022, but is still present. These peaks also coincide with events such as the visit of NATO Secretary General to Canada. So next, let's move on to the topics discussed on Twitter when users talk about the Arctic. To see which issues really dominated, the tweets have been classified into 6 categories, namely animals and nature, diplomacy, environment, military and security, and natural resources. What we can see is that there is a predominance of environmental and natural resources issues, followed by wildlife issues, followed by military and security, then by diplomacy, and finally indigenous issues. Then if we separate by time period over the year, even though environmental issues remain largely predominant, we can see that there were still variations. Again, similar to what we presented earlier, there is a gradual increase in discussions around military when it comes to the Arctic. We can see that the proportion of tweets about military doubles from 6.71 to 13.96 in 2022. So similar to what we saw earlier, we can imagine that it's linked to the Russian war on Ukraine. So on this slide, just to break down 2022, so it shows that military is still important, but it decreased a little bit after a few months. So to push this analysis a little bit further, we decided to do a principal component analysis to see the correlation between different teams. Here we have our 6 variables, which are our 6 main teams. This analysis allows us to see which topics are covered together in the same tweet. Just to remind you again, these are the tweets with the mention of the keyword Arctic from January 2020 to the end of August 2022. Here we can draw 3 types of conclusions. So first, the proximity of the arrows tells us which teams are treated together. We can see here that military and diplomacy are treated together by users. Natural resources, indigenous, and wildlife are more often treated together. Then the length of the arrow tells us about the strength of the correlation. So we can see, for example, that there is a weak correlation for the team indigenous. On the other hand, when the arrow is very long, there's a strong correlation, and we often talk about these teams together. So this is the case for military and diplomacy, for example. And finally, when the arrow of the graph are opposite and the correlation is negative, the teams are not discussed together by users. So here we can conclude, for example, that the more we talk about military, the less we'll talk about natural resources or animal and wildlife. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. With another 3 minutes to go, so we have more time for a period question later. Thank you. And now we'll move to Gregory.
All right. My name is Gregor Peltzer. I'm a political scientist from Luleå University of Technology in northern Sweden. And I'll be talking a little bit about political polarization and whether or not and how polarization plays out on Twitter in the Arctic. So just, I guess, to start things off, there's this big question now on social media in terms of who should you trust, what should you trust, what kind of information is out there. So the one thing that we want to look at, with some of the data that that they're able to collect is what are people saying and what's true or not true. What's the difference between some of the information out there and is there disinformation out there on Arctic Twitter? So as everyone knows, social media has obviously given rise to a lot of disinformation. It's created an avenue and opportunity for people who wouldn't have a platform to speak on to speak. The idea of fake news now is one that pretty much everyone's heard of. It's a concept that everyone's aware of. So what does this do when it comes to choices that citizens make? Where do they get their information? How can they know the validity of the information that they're receiving? So this is increasingly difficult to do. And when it comes to Arctic Twitter, because the environment is, as Julie said, such a big part of the discussion on Arctic Twitter, climate change is obviously an issue that has become very polarized. A lot of different kinds of information out there in terms of what climate change looks like, whether or not it's happening. So this is the example that we looked at when it came to Arctic Twitter. So famously, in 2017, Trump, who you may have heard of, said something to the effect that there was a terrorist attack in Sweden last night, and the reason behind this attack, the connection he made with this attack was because of immigration. Immediately, Carl Bildt, who is the former Prime Minister of Sweden and former Foreign Minister, tweeted out, Sweden, terror attack, what has he been smoking? And so this is a really nice example of how Twitter can actually call to question some of the misinformation or disinformation that's being spread out there. It's a forum both to spread misinformation, but also to quell it, to actually challenge some of the misinformation being put out there. But again, the big question is, as a citizen, people who heard Trump speak, they took it at face value. They believe there was a terrorist attack in Sweden the night before. Other people who are more discerning with the information that they receive actually looked into it and realized, no, there wasn't a terrorist attack in Sweden the night before. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of reinforcing spirals. So one thing that almost all individuals do is they develop patterns of media consumption that correspond to their beliefs and their behaviors. And why is this important? It's because based on those beliefs and behaviors, they'll select certain types of media that they want to consume. And then what happens is, as they consume more and more of that type of media, that type of information, it becomes reinforcing. So they seek that information more and more. So this idea of confirmation bias. You want to read news that confirms your pre-existing beliefs. Now, why is this a problem or maybe a benefit of social media? Well, in social media, it's extremely easy to become very selective in terms of the information that you want to receive. You know your channels, your favorite channels to receive information, so it's easy just to keep going back to those channels and just or to confirm your beliefs over and over and over again. What also happens with these reinforcing spirals is you can have downward spirals or upward spirals. So people who have little political interest, or you could say even political knowledge, will continually go to information that they don't need to validate. Whereas others who have a lot of political interest and maybe a bit more scientific knowledge will go to sources where they can, which are a bit more critical and they actually have to think and develop new ideas. So those people will continue on the upward spirals, and other people who aren't so discerning with the information they receive will continue on what you could call a downward spiral. Now, why does this matter when it comes to the environment or ideas like climate change? Well, it leads to a path of polarization. So polarization, while it's good in terms of increasing political participation, I mean, you look at, again, Trump is an example. He tapped into a demographic in the United States that hadn't been tapped into before. They became a lot more active politically. But with polarization, you also have more partisan reasoning, you have more ideological consistency, again, this reinforcing of beliefs, and then you have overall reduction in support of an issue. And that's the key point here, is that if you have an issue where you have two sides or debating points on the issue, it's much harder to come to an agreement on how to solve that issue if you have increased polarization. So this combination of reinforcing spirals, which is happening on social media, or which is more prone to happen in social media, in combination with polarization creates these echo chambers. And that's where you have this question of whether or not there's actually debate going on or whether it's people just speaking to their friends and people that they want to hear from. So what effect does this bear on Arctic issues, specifically around climate change? So Matthew, who's not here, but he did a lot of work looking at the top 500 most retweeted tweets about the Arctic and the environment, looked at what percentage of those were just disinformation in general, and then within this disinformation percentage, how much of that was climate skeptics, deniers, or climate change skeptics or deniers? And then on the other side, how much of, what percentage of the people tweeting about the Arctic and the environment were actually climate advocates or people advocating for action against climate change? And so you can see there's actually significantly more people advocating for action against climate change on Arctic issues than there are people who are skeptical to it. And here's a graph so you can see it a little bit more clearly, the difference between the two. And then you have that peak in, I think it is, was it July or August? August of 2021. And the reason why you have that peak is that's when you had rainfall on a peak in Greenland for the first time in recorded history. So everyone who was interested in climate change or active around understanding climate change, that's why that was tweeted so much. So a little selection of some of the tweets from the climate skeptic side. So this is a selection of some of the top 500 retweeted tweets across the span of over a year. So, I mean, just take it for what, these are just a small sample of them, but these are some of the most prominent ones that were retweeted. So New Zealand suffers all-time record cold as Greenland's snow and ice gains head off the charts. Key data point now indicate a cooling planet. How long will it be before the likes of the IPCC and their mainstream media lapdogs report on the facts? Arctic sea ice extend highest in 8 years, plus low solar activity and global cooling. While modern civilization rise in this dark age of self-serving agendas, virtue signaling, and dreams of socialism, the reality of our cosmological journey spins on. Al Gore's claim, drawn from climate science, that the Arctic would be ice-free by 2013 stands as a glowing symbol of the absurdity of climate change. Is there any other scientific discipline that makes false predictions 99% of the time? So one thing that we noticed from a lot of the climate skeptic retweets is they often attack, the IPCC or individuals. So a lot of, their discrediting of climate change goes back to either an organization or an individual. Now, when it comes to the climate change awareness promoters, you could say, here's some of the tweets that they had. Europe has had its coldest April since 2013. Global average temp about 0.2 higher than 91 to 2020 average. Sixth lowest Arctic ice extent on satellite record. A relatively cool month does not mean that climate change has stopped. So that was actually in direct response to one of those climate skeptic tweets about these high temperatures. They're saying, one anomaly for 1 month does not represent a trend, obviously. The annual minimum extent of the sea ice in the Arctic gives scientists an idea of the amount of ice that survives year-round. According to new research by NASA ICE and the NSIDC, 2021 was the 12th lowest minimum extent in the 43-year record. Find out more at... And the last month observed temperature anomalies in excess of 5 degrees Celsius in large parts of the Arctic. Again, overall, the average March 2020 global air temperature was 1.05 degrees Celsius above the 5180 climate baseline. And again, a reference or a link to a site. And that's another thing that we notice in a lot of the climate advocate tweets is there's a lot of references to reports and to other sites to actually look at some of the information that is being put out there. Now, the key question is, when it comes to this polarization and what's going on, are these just echo chambers? It's important to consider who's reading these tweets, who's retweeting them, and to what extent cross-conversation is occurring. So there is some cross-conversation occurring. Some people are replying, as you saw with those two examples, about specific things. If someone makes a claim about increased temperature in Greenland, for example, then there's often a counter argument made from the other side saying, well, actually, that's just, an anomaly within the trend. So there is some cross-conversation going on. But what's most obvious is there's a very different perspectives on similar issues that are prevalent in the debate. And when it comes to climate change and the environment in the Arctic, mostly based around temperature and ice levels. That's where people try to draw facts that validate their beliefs, and they put those out there, and it's fairly effective because when you see those are the tweets that get retweeted, they have some traction. So things to think about in the future, and why does this matter for us? Well, on one hand, it's good that the information raising awareness on climate and environment is fairly strong in the Arctic Twitter forum. So you saw the percentages of the people who were climate advocates is relatively high compared to climate skeptics. And there's significantly more scientific-driven data shared across the Arctic Twitterverse. But the main question is, and I guess the question political scientists would ask is, will this change attitudes and behavior in the future? And what information will people trust? And I think this is something that needs to be dug into further. We need to see actually when people actually read some of these tweets, as citizens, how do we absorb this information? How do we take this with us? And does this affect things like our voting behavior? So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll leave it with Eileen.
Thank you very much, Gregory. Eileen?
Help?
Escape.
I just escape. Okay. I'm a Mac person, so this is always a challenge. Okay. Joanne taught me how to do this, but I don't know how to get back on the board. Yeah, you're a tech guy, so. Sorry.
I'm not such a tech guy, finally.
I'll ask her. Sorry.
Do you want the double screen?
Okay, sure, thanks.
No, which one do you want?
No, that's fine, yeah. It's just I have to see it myself. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
No, it's no
Don't learn
problem.
very well.
It's okay. All right.
I'm nervous, so I'm going to take a little bit of a wider view, but also a narrower view, because I'm looking at Norwegian Twitter, or Norwegian Twitter feeds. How many of you have a Twitter account? Whoa, wow, me too. But one of the things that I'm finding is that I have to step back and be selective about the emotion about tweeting right away, right? How many of you find that? No, you just tweet right away emotionally. Tweet about everything. Tweet about the wonderful brioche that you had this morning. Things like that. You sort of have to step back. And so what I'm looking at essentially is the everyday of Twitter and the Twitterverse, but only in the Norwegian context. So that narrows my field a little bit, but I have to apologize to my colleagues because I actually read the platform wrong. And that's because my eyesight is real bad right now. But this is where I'm taking you today, or this evening, in terms of where I'm going and what I'm going to try to explain. And thankfully, Julie had a fantastic presentation on the graphing of, or the data visualization of what we found, at least on the English Twitter. Oh, did you do English? Not French. Okay, on the English part of our platform. I did it wrong because I read the date wrong. I'll show you in a moment. She's showing you this already. There was very little change in terms of the blue is milieu or environment in the Russian context, and very little change, at least in the context of the timing. But the thing is, I've got the timing wrong, but nevertheless, the conclusion is the same. the milieu or environment was much more present in the minds of the Norwegian Twitterers than, let's say, the war in Ukraine after the 24th of February. We were expecting, in fact, that it would have diminished greatly. But no, the concern for the environment, the concern for climate change remained the same before and after the invasion in Ukraine. So that in itself is interesting in terms of what's going on in the minds of those who tweet about the Arctic. Because remember that this is in the context of hashtag Arctic. So just to show you some of the words that have come out, I must say that I had to eliminate Greenland here. Is anyone here from Oslo? No. But if I added Greenland here, Greenland would be the biggest word there, and it's because Greenland is a neighborhood in Oslo that is tweeted a lot by the police and by people on the street saying, hey, there's a fight in Greenland, a neighborhood in Oslo. So I actually had to eliminate Greenland, or Greenland. But Greenland is a neighborhood in Oslo, just to tell you about the little quirk of our platform in Norwegian. So Greenland is completely eliminated from as a hashtag in these data visualizations. But what I also wanted to show you today is that there's a disconnect between what is being tweeted by those who are interested in climate change and environment in the Arctic and the policies that are going on at the level of government and also industry in Norway. So some of the tweets show you that already. Denmark is suspending its new oil licenses, and the U.S. wants to put a moratorium on oil drilling, but Norway continues on. About plastic waste and all of that going on in the Arctic, and governments having to do something about it. That there is a climate crisis here now, and what is the government doing about it? And some more harsher words for those who are thinking about or making policies regarding Anniken Huitfeldt, for example, who is the foreign minister of Norway at the moment, still wanting to provide oil and gas to the EU. And it goes on. A pitch black day for Norway, finally conservative and servile by the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court had just allowed more oil drilling in the Arctic. And also, again, the debates about oil and gas, oil especially, or gas drilling in the Barents Sea. But the disconnect is that Norway goes on with its with the oil and gas industry, as well as now coal on Svalbard. So this disconnect of what's going on in the minds of those who use Twitter, if we can call it the citizens of the Arctic, is quite different from how the state is reacting, at least in the Norwegian context. And I imagine that this is also true in Canada or on Greenland or perhaps Iceland, and certainly the United States. And if we had access, perhaps also Russia, Finland and Sweden. But so what, right? I mean, Gregory has answered this question a little bit. So what? What are we doing here? Why are we looking at Twitter? I mean, the masses of information or words that Alexandra has told us about already. That visual of the paper. It looks like my office actually. How do you categorize all of these tweets in the Twitterverse? But so I'm going to be a little bit philosophical and pay homage to two people. Annie Ernaux, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature just the other day. She has basically said that we are made of words. So what does this mean when we're tweeting about the Arctic in the way that we do, whether it's fake news or real news, or the climate changes that are going on in the Arctic, or your participation at this conference? I'm sure you put the hashtag Arctic in there, as I just did with 2 tweets about this session, or using the word Arctic Center or Arctic Arctic Council. And for those of you who are from the Arctic Center in Finland, that too. So how do we place it in the context of this big mass of words and information, and what will archaeologists say about us 50 years from now or 100 years from now? Will it matter? And the other homage is to Bruno Latour, who just died on the 9th of October, who basically says that we have to engage with the non-human in the Arctic, and that includes the data visualization, the data that we're collecting in the Arctic, but also means engaging with the sea, or how would the sea tweet about what's happening to it in the Arctic? So in this context of examining what Twitter and what is being tweeted about the Arctic, what do these two have to say about that, and how do we contextualize it in the archaeology of this knowledge that we are leaving behind, essentially as people in the Arctic, as we are creating our own identities in the Arctic by creating this platform, by creating the hashtag Arctic, by creating hashtag Arctic Circle or Arctic. I'm thinking in Norwegian, our Arctic Council, for example. But what Bruno Latour has also told us is that we have to focus on the social aspect of this. Why is it that we are creating this identity? And what is it that brings us together as people who are interested in tweeting about the Arctic, tweeting about climate change? And so it's that social element that he wants to, or he has wanted to see in terms of engaging with the non-human within a human perspective. And Annie Ernaux, I'll just quote her, "Language will continue to put the world into words." That's a little line taken out of context, and I'm out of time, otherwise I would read it. But thank you, and now we have questions.
Thank you very much, Aileen. So we'll open the floor for questions. If you could please just maybe say your name and who the question is for and what the question is. We are listening to you. We had 4 excellent presentations, so I'm pretty sure that at least comments, if not questions. Please go ahead.
A bit of a question, just a general one, because especially to the one, I'm sorry I forgot your name, you were in political science.
Me, Gregory.
Gregory, nice to meet you. I myself am studying international relations, so it's a bit of a connection there.
Yep.
But I was wondering whether, before she was talking about identity as well, do you see this as a constructivist analysis in some way, like a connection there?
Me personally, I mean, of course you could take, you could definitely do a constructivist analysis on Twitter and how it's used, and so, a lot of the language that's used on Twitter. I think that if you want to take that approach, I think that'd be extremely fascinating. If you actually want to look more closely at a lot of the language that's used on Twitter. So I mean, if you want to, from a very superficial level, just look at the way, or one of the trends that we notice in terms of the climate skeptics is there's a lot of ad hominem attacks. There's a lot of personalities and identities attached to discrediting whether or not climate change is real, or at least the way that you could say the IPCC represents, the reports on climate change. Whereas if you were if you were to do that sort of analysis from the climate concerned side or climate advocate side, you could easily make the argument in terms of how they frame their arguments. There's a lot, there's lack of personality, attached to it. It's more science driven, if you want. There's a lot more reference to academic literature in the tweets. And so while that's good from a scientific point of view, does that actually change people's minds? I mean, when you ask, the average citizen how many academic journal articles do they read a year, it's going to be a very low number. So in terms of winning that debate, is that the most effective strategy? Probably not. But from a there's a clear difference there in terms of how those arguments are presented and some of the rationale behind them.
Thank you, Gregory. We still have about 9 minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Katerina Kritisova. I work as a postdoc at the European Leadership Network, and I'm affiliated with Wilson Center as well. So you've presented the problem, and then are there any best practice examples of how different countries are responding, or do you think we need a multilateral approach to dealing with this? Well, disinformation, social media, polarization, all the issues that you described in presentations.
Go ahead, Eileen.
I'll answer that with, by referring you to a BBC article that appeared today about Finland and its fight against disinformation and fake news. And it started off by saying that there was a fake news or a bad tweet, I guess, about the streams of Russians coming across the border. And it was, in fact, false. And as Gregory said, it was immediately contradicted by the border police. But one of the things that is endemic or in Finland is that it's a high trust society. So it trusts its government and police and things like that very highly. Something like in the mid-70s, 75%. But one of the things that the article suggested, and of course this is not a scientific article, it's from the BBC, but they interviewed a lot of people, including educators, is one of the things that Finns have done policy-wise is to educate from the very, very beginning on what is fake news and how do you tell what fake news is. And as I was telling my colleagues earlier, it begins very, very, very early, like basically at kindergarten or in grade school, that it has to come at that level of education. And I would also suggest that education just widely is sort of the bulwark against, or to be able to analyze critically what one is reading. So, I mean, we teach that also at universities, and certainly at good school, elementary school.
Thanks. And if I can add to Eileen's argument, so I think multilateral approach is it's necessary, but I will also say like a transversal approach. The Quebec government did the same thing, and now they have critical thinking that is taught at elementary school, and the idea is to develop more objective thinking, critical thinking within the young. So it's not just about fake news, but it's about every information they have, how to classify the information, how to know what's useful, what is not useful. Because like 20 years ago, the problem we had was to have kid access information. Now the problem we have is that kids have an overload of information and they can't select what information is good or not, what is objective or not, what is true or not. Anyone like to add to that?
I'll just add quickly. I think one thing that, if you want to look at from an Arctic perspective or like a transboundary perspective, is when you look at just the percentages of the sort of disinformation versus more science factual information. There's a big gap between the two. So if I were a politician or someone working at a researcher, you know that if you put information out there, there's a good chance it's going to be picked up and retweeted. It's not, you just don't put something out there and it's just lost forever. There is actually a community out there who are interested in Arctic issues around the environment, who actually pick up on that information, actually share it, retweet it. And that, the more that happens, the more likely that's going to get picked up by other people and by mainstream media as well. I mean, it's not like mainstream media, they have no choice but to be aware of the conversation that's going on Twitter. So if I were someone, who has some effect on policy or want to implement policy, that'd be something I be aware of, know that you actually have a chance to get picked up on Twitter and actually have a chance to, get some momentum in terms of an idea. As long as it's, scientifically based, it actually has hope of getting retweeted.
And I would add to that, that's very interesting, but I would add to that, there's another concern. Uh, it's the bullying effect within social media, which prevents some expert to actually uh, post anything on social media. I actually have, like, I myself been insulted on social media for like completely objective fact, and I have colleagues who actually were threatened, like death threat and everything, because they simply because they say, this industry, we have a lack of information about this or that in the food industry, and they get uh, death threat for that. So, when you're a professor, you're not necessarily equipped to deal with death threats. So, at some point, we have people say, you know what, I have my article. They're published in a journal. I don't need to put that on social media. So, another dimension in your question. Other question or comments? We still have 3 minutes to go on the clock. No. Yes.
My name's Sam. I'm a student here at Iceland, and I was wondering, you mentioned how youth have access to a lot of disinformation now, and how you use other social media platforms, maybe like Instagram, that attract younger populations instead of just looking into Twitter.
If we try Instagram,
Yeah, are you looking into using other social media platforms to also?
we, yeah, that's an excellent. Okay, that's an excellent question. So, for one reason why we focus on Twitter is because Twitter give us access to their API, and it's so we sent an academic request. So we have like tons of forms to fill out. We have ethics certificate, all things like that, that allows us to extract tweets and treat tweets, and we have some limitation on how we use them, etc. After, what was the name of that company?
Cambridge Analytica.
Cambridge Analytica. Facebook closes API, and a lot of other social media close their API. So we have access to a certain function of their API, but it's not what we need. So there's another way of doing this, which is legal but not ethical. So we have to respect those ethical guidelines. And right now, one of the problem we have also with social media is there aren't that much of ethical guidelines to follow. So Twitter is really good at it. I mean, they really did a good job, and it's easy for us. And following their guidelines, it's easy for us to send a request for an ethical certificate in our university, and it works pretty well. We have no guidelines with Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. So the community is not sure on what are the guidelines here, because let's say you produce a TikTok video. It's public. Now, can I use it in my analysis without asking your express consent of it? Because I'm changing the nature of what you're of the reason of why you're doing this. You didn't do it as a response to a survey I did, for instance. So that's one of the reasons. But we are looking into how we can use other social media. That's for sure. But we're not there yet because we still have a lot of work we can do with Twitter.
And the other important thing is one thing we're not allowed to do with Twitter is to how could I say that without sounding super creepy. We cannot profile people. We're not allowed to profile people, which was the big problem with Facebook. Because everyone here probably has a Facebook. I tell you right now, if you knew what I could do with Facebook like 2 years ago, you would close your Facebook right away, like right away.
Yeah.
I brought ethical concern to my master advisor, and he was like, "Oh, no, that's not a problem." And like 2 weeks later, it was Cambridge Analytica. And it was basically what I was about to do. So it's not a good thing, and we're forbidden by the guideline of Twitter to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, profiling is not permitted, even if it would be very easy to do. All right.
Maybe if they want to see the app.
Uh, it's over. Our time is up. Thank you very much for coming. If any one of you would like to look at the apps we develop, you can ask Alexandre, and he'll gladly show you what the app is and how we use it. And bear in mind that we're using it in different languages. And if you're any interested, we could add language to other languages to the app. Thank you very much.